Next is our third technical session, and it is on the topic Development Sectoral Concerns. I request all the dignitaries to be kindly come to the dais and please be seated. Professor Padmini Swaminathan, who will be the chair of the session, Dr. M. Kabir, Dr. Prasad A.K., Dr. D. Shyjan. I welcome you, all of you, to the dais. For the formal welcome, may I invite Sandra to the dais.
All, it is with great pleasure that I stand before you to deliver the welcome address for the third technical session. First, I would like to extend a hearty welcome to Professor Padmini Swaminathan, a well-known feminist economist who has already shared her brilliant thoughts with us in the previous session. Welcome, ma'am. I also extend a very warm welcome to Dr. M. Kabir, former head Department of Economics, Govt.Women's College, Trivandrum, who is also the main speaker for the session and a very popular face in the economics sector. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. D. Shyjan, Assistant Professor, Dr. John Mathai Center, University of Calicut, and Dr. Prasad A.K., Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Kerala, and the guiding light of our department. Once again, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you present here. Thank you.
I request Professor Padmini Swaminathan to start the session.
Good afternoon to all of you. The food given to us was for nutritional purposes, not for us to go to sleep. I now request Dr. Kabir to make his presentation. He's getting his laptop ready. And so I'm looking forward to his presentation. We have met after a very long time. And he's kind of asked me that he will not speak for more than 20 minutes. Okay? Yeah. Thank you, Kabir.
In fact, this paper, though the idea came from me, has mainly been due to Prof. Shyjan. And he did almost the whole book with the national plan. And it is a joint paper by Kabir and Shyjan. The title is Group Inequalities in Kerala, some tentative observations. So I underlined the word tentative because we have to do some more work before finalizing. And in the Indian context, broadly, one important sociological aspect is the caste system. The Varna system is divided the society into the Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra categories. In fact, did not prevail in Kerala. Kerala's Jati system or the caste system was different from the Varna system. In fact, Kerala did not have a Vaishya community. And the 1901 census on Travancore explained it by saying that function precedes organization. And because there is no scope for the activities of a trading community here, a trading caste did not emerge. On the other hand, Kerala, I would say, has been having a very strong caste system, and it used to be more stringent and tough than the caste system elsewhere in India. And when we look at inequalities, economic inequalities, not much work has been done on the basis of caste and religious groups. So ours is an attempt to study the group inequalities based on caste groups and religious groups. And in fact, the motivation for this, though I've done some work on this in this area before, the motivation for this mainly came from the paper by Ashwini Deshpande in the American Economic Review, and also the work which she undertook with William Darity Jr. and Ashwini Deshpande, edited Boundaries of Clan and Color, Transnational Comparisons of Comparisons of Intergroup Disparity. And she summarized, before this book, she had summarized the various findings in a review article on the review of social sciences. It's a very brief analysis made in the introduction to that review of social sciences. And here we take, usually when we take the question of group inequality, even with caste or religious, analyzing caste or religion, we have tended to take the intergroup inequality by almost ignoring the intra-group inequality. So our attempt here is to take mainly the intergroup and intra-group inequalities. But to analyze the intra-group inequalities, statistics permits us to limit the study of intra-group inequality to one MBC, by taking one MBC, and the second by taking assets, okay, the distribution of assets. And for this, and for the study, we have made use of the NSSO survey on employment and unemployment, 2011-12, and that is the 68th round, and also NSSO debt and investment survey, again 2011-12, and that is the 71st round. Is that right? 70th or 71st. And the groups that we have taken, that is again, the nature of the data permit us to make a classification into scheduled tribes, scheduled castes, Muslims, Christians, forward Hindus, and Hindu OBC. And this sort of an analysis is possible only in the context of Kerala, using the NSSO data, because the entire Muslim community of Kerala belong to OBC. And that is why such a classification becomes possible. Otherwise, the possible classification would be SC, ST, others. Is it all right? Now, first we will have a look at First, we'll take the composition of the population percentage-wise. This is on the basis of the employment and unemployment survey. Scheduled tribes come to 1.1%, scheduled castes 8.4%, Muslims 28.6%, Christians 15%, forward Hindus 13.8%, and the Hindu OBCs 33.1%. This is the composition of the population based on the NSSO estimates. And first we have taken to analyze, first we will go through the inter-group inequality. And the first thing that we have taken is the MPC, the monthly per capita consumption expenditure, and the mean values are given here. It is actually the inequality is visible. That is, the highest consumption expenditure is by Christians, followed by forward Hindus, Hindu OBCs, Muslims, ST and SC in that order. I'll come back to this data towards the end again. And now, if you take the Gini coefficient of this one, for the inter-group, that is for the groups, if we take the Gini coefficient, what we get is 0.38. We will come back to this later. That is, the Gini coefficient is 0.38. And then we have taken the percentage distribution of households in each social group according to land owned. And here too we find the specific gap among the different socio-religious groups. And because of the time limit, I will be going from one to another. We have taken again the asset position of different social groups. And here too, we may take the mean values, Christians at the top, followed by Hindu forward, by Hindu backward, by Muslims, and then by scheduled castes, and then by scheduled tribes. And then, if you take the mean asset, also the earlier one was the per capita asset, if we take the value of the mean asset also, we find the differences. And then we have taken according to educational attainment. I'll club together everything at a later stage. A percentage distribution of persons aged at 15 and above according to educational attainment. We may take the last row, persons with education secondary and above. Scheduled tribe 34.1%, scheduled caste 38.8%, Muslims 36.9%, Christians 60.1%, Hindu backward caste 49.8%, Hindu forward caste 65.7%, and all 48.9%. And here too we find the lowest position for the STs and the highest position for the forward caste, and then ST, SC, Muslims, Hindu backward, Christians, and then Hindu forward. And then we have taken the activity status of persons, and here if we take regular salaried group, this is an important area, and actually we can skip this table, but we find the differences coming in quickly. We have categorized on the basis of activity status, on the basis of enterprise type, and within enterprise type there is one interesting aspect, and this is to be checked. If we take row 5, which connotes employment in government and public sector, ST 4%, that is of the total employment, ST 4%, SC 8.86%, Muslims 13%, Christians 11.1%, forward Hindu 22.3%, and Hindu OBC 41%. That is the, in terms of population, the last one comes to 33%, whereas their representation in the government and public sector employment comes to 41%. The politics of that you can work out. I'm not going into the details of the next table, but this table actually, this is the core part of the analysis. And till now we were concerned only with intergroup inequality. And between group MBC, the Gini coefficient comes to 0.38. With respect to per capita asset, it is 0.641. And with respect to land, 0.7123. These are the Gini coefficient for among groups, that is for inter-group inequality. But if you take the intra-group inequality, and if you take the case of the monthly per capita consumption expenditure, inequality is the highest among STs, followed by Christians, then by forward Hindu caste, then by Hindu OBC, and then by Muslims. That's the order in which the inequality is the highest in the case of ST. And there are certain parallels in these tables. If you take the assets, then the ranking in terms of per capita as an inequality index, in terms of per capita as a fits perfectly well with the MBC. That is, the higher the inequality in terms of assets, the higher the inequality in terms of MBC. But there is one, perhaps the most important thing that emerges. If you take MBC, the MBC is usually taken as a proxy to income. If you take, the inequality is the lowest among scheduled castes and within scheduled caste communities and within the Muslim community. Whereas it is the highest in the case of Christians. Then comes Hindu OBC and then forward Hindu community. Then what would this imply? Following this finding, one can argue that, you see, the first three communities and the last two, they are having reservations in Kerala. But you see, the inequality is the highest in the case of 0.413 Christianity and among forward Hindus. Then, if at all we are arguing the case of a creamy layer, the creamy layer should be the most pertinent in these two groups, Christianity and forward Hindus. In the other case, inequality is fairly low. And we have seen that those are the groups where, in terms of intergroup inequality, those are the groups which stand at the lowest. And inequality is also lower. So the whole question of criminal is to be revisited in this context. That is one type of conclusion that we are reaching. That is the conclusion, in fact, reached by Deshpande earlier. And this correlation between inequality in terms of asset, land, ABC, the ranking is the same. But here we differ from Deshpande's that review study, when she says that we cannot find an one-to-one relationship between inequality in terms of asset and inequality in terms of consumption. why we take these two? Perhaps NBC is the best yardstick to understand inequality following Deaton. And Deaton's that book on household surveys, which is a masterly work, which is supposed to be the best work on how to analyze data, how to analyze primary data. The Deaton specifically says that when you are studying inequality, particularly group inequality, it will be better if you go to the consumption expenditure rather than anything else. So this is the case of intergroup and intra-group inequalities. So even the presentation has been a bit dull because first it is half proof. Second, in fact, the statistical work was done only last night, was finished only last night. And in fact, we didn't want to go for a Gini coefficient. We'll be changing that later. In fact, what we tried to use was the tail index. But unfortunately, we were not able to have any statistical package to do that. So when we write this, we'll change this by using either the tail index or the Atkinson index, or there is an index that is developed by the UNDP of to analyze that we will do. But there is another implication also. That is, in fact, Ashwini argues that reservation has not been an effective means in reducing inequality. That is what she argues. That is, to quote Ashwini, that is, of course, what she argues is that it has not been sufficient in reducing intergroup inequality, reservation. But at the same time, what we find here is that it might have worked in reducing inequality within it. So this is actually, the study has been planned mainly in the light of Ashwini Deshpande's pioneering. Thank you very much.
Can I ask Dr. Prasad?
Yes.
The topic for my presentation is private development in Kerala, problems and prospects. Actually, I want to present before you what are the problems faced by leaders in this state. I have been asked to confine my presentation within the time limit. So I have to omit some of the problems from the presentation. This is the way tribals are silenced, marginalized. So I am obeying. But in India, tribals, you know that they are the most vulnerable sections. Before independence, there were a large number of approaches regarding private development. The prominent among them are policy of isolation, policy of assimilation, and policy of integration. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was much fond of implementing the policy of integration, and he actually opted for policy of integration, and this continues to influence the tribal development strategy even today. A large number of programs, projects, schemes have been implemented, but still the integration of the tribals with the rest of the society remains unfulfilled. I am coming to the state population of tribals. According to 2011 census, the scheduled tribe population in the state is 0.48 million, which constitutes 1.44% of the state population. State government had earmarked a separate fund from the plan of place of successive fire plan for their social economic uplift. the fund earmarked for their development is proportional to their share of population in the state. Every government was very careful about maintaining higher and higher proportion of the state plan outlays for their development. This is tribal development policy. You know that right from the beginning of 5-year plan, as Jawaharlal Nehru visioned, large number of schemes were implemented. But those schemes were welfare schemes. But it was in the 5th 5-year plan that strong development measures were introduced. They were commonly known as tribal development, TSP, tribal subplan. Under the tribal subplan, large number of schemes were introduced for their development. The states have been required to allocate the plan funds to the TSP, at least in proportion to the share of tribal population. So priorities continued till the 8th 5-year plan, but the 9th 5-year plan, which is not for its own features, the 9th 5-year plan adopted a 3-pronged strategy. They are social empowerment, economic empowerment, and social justice. The plan ultimately aimed at empowering the tribals. And this continued in the subsequent plan, the 10th plan, 11th plan, and the 12th plan. This is a socio-economic advancement. I think that the socio-economic advancement seems to be a tough task to be accomplished because of the desired level of improvement in the socio-economic conditions could not be achieved. It is a reality as far as we are concerned. So the tribals have really become impoverished over the years, primarily due to their incapacity to benefit from the large number of development schemes implemented for their upliftment. So this means that higher outlays have failed to result into the corresponding improvement in their socio-economic conditions in the state. This is the educational progress. Educational tribals are still, their educational progress is still very slow. So as education is, you know that education is the most important instrument for promoting economic and social advancement. Therefore, prime importance have been given to their education progress in all 5-year plans for their education development. Financial assistance are given in the form of scholarship, then fees concession. Even the parents are given some kind of incentives. Despite these, their education progress seem to be very slow. You know that 5% seats in education institutions are reserved for them. But their education progress is very pathetic, and this is evidenced by the continuing gap between the literacy level of cities and the general population. I did not give the figures in the form of tables here, but the gap continues to be very wide. According to the 2011 census, literacy rate among STs is 67.29%, while that of the SCs and the general population is 80.36 and 94% respectively. This is education attainment. I prepared the figures from the census report 2011. You know that illiterate, you can compare SCs and STs. Illiterates among STs is 32.71. You come down, graduate and above, only 2.2% of tribals are graduate. Technical diploma holders are constitute only 0.92%. Non-technical diploma holders forms only 0.06%. This is clear from these figures that their education progress is not at the expected level. I request your attention to another table, table 1B. This is I got these figures from the report of report regarding socio-economic status of STs in Kerala. This was published by the Tribal Development Department of Government of Kerala in 2013. In the previous table, you know that it is clear that they are very backward. After 2 years, this report was prepared. Same thing. Okay. PG graduates 0.30, graduates 1.6, SLC holders 11.16. All these things indicate that vast majority of tribals' education qualification is below matriculation. Next, we can go to work participation rate compared to the other states in India. Work participation rate and tribals is a little low. But compared to other social sections in the state, the work participation rate of tribals is very high. The relative economic backwardness of STs is actually reflected in their occupational pattern. Occupational classification of main workers among tribals shows that of the total number of main workers, 50.30% are working in the agriculture sector. The percentage of tribal workers employed in industrial and service sector is found to be very less compared to general population and the SCs. So this can be attributed to their low educational standards and skill. You know that secondary and tertiary sector, for employment in the secondary and tertiary sector, skill is equal. But as far as tribals are concerned, very skilled educationally, they are very backward. So industrial and service sectors require the trained manpower. This is a reality. I invite your attention to table 2, sector-wise classification of main workers, the agricultural allied sectors, secondary and tertiary sectors, total. You can compare GP, general population, SCs and STs. See, of the total main workers among the STs, 51.56% are in agriculture sector. Then in the secondary and tertiary sector together, 48.4% are working. But you compare with the SCs and the general population. In the respect of general population, it is 82.19% of the main workers are in industrial and service sector. As far as SCs are concerned, of the total main workers, 75% are in secondary and tertiary sector. But in the case of STs, vast majority are working in the agriculture sector, which provides very low wage. Their representation in central government service, actually in central government service, 7.5% posts are reserved for STs. You look at the figures, in 1994, their representation is only 5.49. In 1999, it is 6.17. In 2004, it is 6.56. In the beginning of 1960s, it was only 2%. They have really underrepresented in the service sector, especially in the government service. Poverty among tribals is widespread. They are actually in the whirlpool of poverty and education. Poverty estimates of the state government. Poverty estimates of the state government show that the gap between general population and the STs in respect of the incidence of poverty continues to be increasingly very wide. I have examined one report, a report of tribal development department. According to tribal development department, about 51.32% of ST families in the state are below poverty line. This is an alarming figure. This table belongs to the poverty incidences belong to different years in 1985, 1992, 1998, 1999. The figures suggest that vast majority of them are below poverty line. Landlessness is a big problem as far as tribals are concerned. Large-scale alienation of tribal lands happened during the last 4-5 decades. Actually, tribals are hard hit in the landless distribution. This is true, especially in Wayanad, Calicut, and Calicut districts. In 1975, government of Kerala, our legislature enacted an act. Actually, this act contains stringent measures to provide tribals sufficient land. But instead of implementing this act, the government of Kerala repealed that act. Subsequently, several enactments were introduced in the legislature, but none of the acts were implemented so far. So, had all those acts implemented timely, their landless problem would have solved. This is housing and indebtedness. Housing is a problem as far as tribals are concerned. The government of Kerala really started housing programs right from 1991 onwards in order to provide housing, better housing facilities. State Development Department is having a number of schemes. Road Development Department, Road Development Commission has a number of schemes for them. Then Kerala Development Corporation for Residents and STs, the State Housing Board, these have been either agencies for housing schemes for tribals, for the tribals, for solving the tribals of business. But the problem is severe. According to the report of socio-economic status of the STs in Kerala, published in 2013, the tribal development by the Tribal Development Department, 25% of ST families in the state are. This is bigger. Another problem is that indebtedness facing by tribals. Actually, they are indebted. According to the same report, 9.61% of tribal families are under debted travel. These are the figures adopting to the plan of place for tribal development. You know that, as I said earlier, the percentage of plan of place devoted for tribal development is going upwards. So, from the table it is clear that huge amount is spent for tribal development, but what is their percentage like? They are, the situation is highly deplored. I am concluding, confining my presentation to the conclusions are tribal still continue to be victims of socio-economic deprivations. Their socio-economic backwardness makes them easy prey to exploitation by the non-tribals. However, education can be treated as an area where they have made some kind of progress, but that is not impressive. So the everlasting solution to the present impasse lies at improving the employability of tribal human resources. Employability. There are well-educated tribals among that community, but they are not employed. They are going to the schools, colleges, or technical education center and getting degrees, but they are not at all employable. So I think that the government should take more measures to improve the employability of tribal human resources. I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Something on the costing of development, especially in a developing economy. We all are familiar with the problem that we, especially at this particular moment in time, we experience, especially with respect to the use of the very terminology called development. We often confront with, or we often get confused that the kind of economic progress or growth, in fact, what is happening now is being either purposefully or not distorted and using a different word called development. But from our graduation onwards, we are so familiar with the clear-cut distinction between the word growth and development. And we are easily getting it translated to Malayalam as Vigasana, especially in the world of election, is time of election. And use the word Vigasana Tudakcha, Vigasana Viruthan. So I'm just confused as, like you, whether we are having a time of development or we are simply having a time of growth or economic progress. Why we have to stress this fundamental question is because the very empirics gives you the idea that we are not having economic development but we are having economic growth. And again, coming back to the developing economies, we find a stark difference between the first world developed countries and their third world counterparts in terms of the development path or in terms of the growth process. Especially, for example, if I say that we will be having even different theories or different explanations are there in the literature on explaining the kind of growth process in developing countries and the developed countries. For example, we are familiar with the dependency school and many other things which says that even the development of the developed countries are related to or due to or it happens together with the underdevelopment of the underdeveloped countries. Even during the liberalized world, are we sure that we are getting a clear direction from the developed world, the ladder that we have to use? If I use the word of Aju Chang and his book on kicking away the ladder, he clearly points out that the ladder used by the developed countries to reach to their present position is entirely different to that they now proclaim for the developing countries to follow. So why I have mentioned all these things is just to give an idea that even to the topic of my presentation, we may have to go for different kinds of explanation and different kinds of theoretical constructs in explaining the growth process, especially in explaining the structural transformation. And again, more specifically in explaining the services sector growth and its problems. Why the services sector? We all know. The stylized facts and all other theories we studied in the textbooks tells us the kind of linear stage or linear structural change that the developed countries are facing or experiencing together with their economic progress. Or they do say that the structural transformation happens on par with the economic progress. Again, if we come back to the developing countries, are we sure to say that the kind of structural transformation that happens in the developing countries, especially in India or even Kerala, is on par with economic progress, or it is something different? So this is the reason why I mentioned all these above mentioned facts, to say that we need to have a different kinds of explanation of what kind of growth that we have and what kind of structural transformation that we have, and more specifically what kind of services sector growth that we have. If I state at the very beginning itself that the services sector growth in Kerala or even in India cannot be considered the same or similar to that of the services sector growth that we experience in the developed countries. Then the question comes is, then what is the differences, then how do we explain it? In the process of explaining it, there comes the limits of it also. What are the limits? In fact, there are a number of limitations, starting from the question of sustainability. Many people have written and many people are complaining that whether the services sector growth is sustainable. If you are having a growth process simply bypassing the manufacturing or the agriculture, or basically the goods producing sectors, whether it has got any credibility, whether it is sustainable or not. We have got implications on the fiscal side too, especially in a federal economy like India. Let us take only Kerala's case. Now, a number of studies which argue that the tax base, the GSDP is supposed to be the tax base. And in the GSDP composes, 65% of the GSDP is composed by the services sector. So your tax base, the major portion of your tax base is composed by the services sector, but the taxing power of the services sector is rests with the central government. So in a federal economy, the literature says that even if you are having a service sector-led growth, and which leads to a problem, a limit, the limit is this: the growing tax base of your economy is out of your tax net. It is being taxed by the central government. So it has got a different kinds of limits, and it has got a fiscal side limit also. Second, employment side. Employment side, what I mean is that even in the structural change theories, they do not only confine their analysis of the structural change in terms of the GDP or output alone, but they do speak about the employment transformation also. It means that how the industrial workforce change from one sector to the other is also a matter of concern for the structural change theories. But unfortunately, most of the studies that we find, especially in the Kerala and Indian context, are confining to the output side, especially in Kerala's case. There are a number of studies are there which explains the output share of the services sector, but we have only limited studies. We would not have a clear-cut analysis on the employment side of the services sector. Why? There is one more reason, because we cannot go further at the disaggregated level if we are having output as the unit of measurement for the structural transformation. It means that for the output you have only 14 sector and 9 sector classification. For example, agriculture, manufacturing, the construction, or trade, hotels and restaurants. In that way, you have only 9 or 13 subsector classification if you follow the national account statistics and we follow the output related kind of a structural transformation. If you want to analyze what exactly is a services sector, what exactly is a services subsector which is growing or which is lagging, to understand the actual pattern of growth within the service sector, it is not possible simply by using the national account statistics. So we have to go for a kind of employment dimension too. The question now comes is whether the structural transformation that we experience in terms of the output is also true when we take the case of the employment also. Or in the employment what we experience is a jobless growth in the services sector. Or the employment should also there is a structural transformation towards the services. This question is also very important. If you address this question, I think we will be falling into its implications too. If we clearly analyze the services sector and its subsectors over time, which subsector is growing and which subsector is lagging, we can understand two things. One, the kind of structural transformation that happens in the developing economy, especially in India and Kerala, can be understood. And two, its implication can also be analyzed. So there are important questions or limits when we explain or when we start studying about the services sector. But here, I will only be dealing with the employment side and its implications on the inequality. Employment side, because as I mentioned, we cannot go further in terms of the output, in terms of the national account statistics because of the data availability problem, and therefore we use the employment thing. I am not going to the theoretical constructs, but only by citing the fact that the important reasons which is cited in the literature for the structural transformation, say from the agriculture to industry or from industry to the services sector, is the income elasticity of demand or the conventional Engel's law. But just think about a middle income or low income economy whose economic growth is not that much faster, then how can you say that when income increases, the proportion of the amount spent for the primary sector declines, or the income elasticity difference explains the structural transformation? We cannot explain even using the Engel's curve, especially in the case of the developing countries. This again point to the fact that we need to have a different kinds of explanation of the kind of service sector growth we experience in India, as we in developing countries in general and Kerala or India in particular. While we search through the literature, I find 3 kinds of hypotheses which are already there in the literature in explaining the developing economy service sector growth. This you may be familiar with, and this we will be summarizing it: the surplus labor hypothesis, the dependency score hypothesis, and the duality hypothesis. These three hypotheses basically explain how can there be a higher share of services sector in developing countries and in contrast to the developed countries. Basically, these theories say that the developing countries' experience is in stark contrast to developed countries. What is the contrast? Contrast is this: in developed countries, it has got a linear kind of growth from primary to secondary and secondary to tertiary. But to the developing countries, basically most of the developing countries are bypassing, especially if we come back to the 1970s or so. If you take the Asian tigers, except that countries, or even Taiwan and the China, the industrializing economies or the industrialized economies of Asian tigers, especially India as a developing economy can be explained using these kind of 3 theories. They say that there is a population pressure on land. There are a huge number of people who are working on the land, working on the agriculture sector as a disguised or underemployed. And these people are not skilled enough to be absorbed in the manufacturing sector. And the manufacturing sector as such is not that developed. Therefore, the only possible way out for them to change from the agriculture sector is to the services sector. And within the services sector, where is the question? In Indian case, including Govt.Women, many people have attempted, and they say that, and most of the people who are transformed from the population pressured land, they are transforming to the low paid services activities. The low paid services activities include many things, including the peddling, the cart, the small scale trade, the retail trade. All these things are included in the small scale, the low paid services activities. So this is very clear in the Indian data. Especially Govt.Women clearly says that during the reform period, the services sector is growing, but this growth is mainly contributed by the poor quality services, not better quality services. What we mean by poor quality services in terms of three things: in terms of wage, in terms of education, and in terms of the social security. In these three terms, he is defined better and poor quality, and he concludes that in India, yes, we experience the services sector growth during the reform period especially, but this is overwhelmingly being contributed by the low paid services activities, not by the high paid activities. So therefore, let us think about the kind of structural transformation that we experience in India as a developing economy is a kind of thing which goes in together with the economic progress. That this is why some of the people have asked the question whether the economic growth that contributed to the structural transformation or structural transformation that contributed to the economic growth. And for the Indian context, we may say that this may be because of the measurement problems, the definitional problems within the services sector, especially toward the informal or the poor quality services sector, which bulks the total services sector, and therefore economic growth will be much higher. Where economic growth, especially, take the case of in Kerala, the latest economic review says that, and I think during the recent history, it is the highest decline, minus 10.9% is the growth rate from the agriculture sector. Manufacturing is also not that having a better growth rate. So you have a situation where your growth rate is highly contributed by the services sector. Then what would be our conclusion? Our conclusion whether it will be like our economic growth has contributed to the services sector growth, or the kind of growth that we experience is only because of the services sector predominance. And in Kerala's context, this has to be verified. What has to be verified is which kind of services sector is growing and which kind of service sector is lagging. From where we can have some implications on the inequality. This is what I do in the rest part of my presentation. This is a familiar table to you. Very fast. No. The employment growth is around 1%, but you have an SDP growth rate of 2, 7, 5, 6, 10. What does it mean? If you are not generating more employment, and if your economic growth is increasing faster, then the enlarging cake is distributed among whom? If I say that employment is a primary route through which people earn income, and suppose that the people are not getting employment, then where does the contribution or where does the fruits of the growth go? This is a structural transformation thing. I'm not going into the detail because of lack of time. I'm just going to the unbundling of services sector. Which services are growing and which services are lagging behind? If I show you this table, only this table, I have two columns. The first column shows the period before 1993-94, and the second column gives you the information on after 1993-94. And this here I have listed out certain services activities, including the retail trade, sale maintenance, land transport. This land transport includes the rickshaw, auto rickshaw, everything will be coming there. There's the trade, hotels and restaurant. I have mentioned these activities within the service just to highlight the fact that even now, to the total growth rate of the employment in the state, 0.58, 0.49, 0.12, the major share has been coming from the low paid services activities. But when compared to the previous period, its contribution is lesser. This is an important point to be noted. Let us look at the next table, which are supposed to be the better quality services in terms of the three criteria I explained earlier. What we find is an acceleration during the reform period in Kerala towards a more quality in the sense more wage, the highly paid kind of services sector. What I try to give you is that we also have a service-led growth paradigm in Kerala. We have a service-led growth paradigm in India, but these two are different. Where in India, if you have a situation of poor quality services which are dominating during the reform period, which is not that much that in Kerala, it is slightly different. But again, if I go further into that, I would say that the financial intermediation, computer-related activities, an ICT kind of a thing, business thing, real estate thing, all these kind of activities are gaining momentum during the reform period, but not the other activities. I would rather say that this has got some kind of implications, which I gather from the literature. They say that the wage differentials will be there. Especially in the context of Kerala, you say that there is wage parity in the agriculture sector because of the unionization and other institutional factors. This is familiar to us. There are a political statement blaming the unionization, but we have a clear-cut data and we have a clear-cut fact which shows that this is the unionization which helped a parity of wages in the agriculture sector. Not only that, it helped even to make a benchmark of wages so as to fix the wages of the other sectors. But what I try to find, what I find in the service sector is that this has not helped the services sector. Maybe because of the absence of unionization, I don't know what exactly is the reason. The kind of wage parity that we find in the manufacturing or agriculture sector is not found in the services sector. And also, the kind of benchmark that we expected to follow in the other sectors from the agriculture is also not happening in the services sector. Maybe because of the unionization, maybe because of different other reasons. But this is a fact that we know that we have only organizations and movements within the service sector led by the owners of the capital, owners, not by the workers. So the workers do not have a kind of movement or a kind of a collaboration within the service. Maybe one of the reasons which explain there is no wage parity within the service. The wage disparity can clearly be explained if you take the wage across the sectors and find within group inequality. Within group inequality, the primary sector, secondary sector and tertiary sector. Especially during the reform period, what we find starting from the reform period on 1993-94 onwards, for all the rounds of NSSO, unemployment survey, we find that the wage inequality is much higher within the services sector, and there is a kind of parity within the aggregate, within the primary, it's only 0.23, but here it is around double, about double, 0.43 within the services sector. So the kind of structural transformation led by the services sector in Kerala has got an inequality implication which is evident from the Gini coefficient table and also which is evident from the tail index. Tail index is nothing but decomposition of the total inequality into different groups. Now I find that the green line, the green bar which represents the services sector also shows that the inequality within the services sector is much higher. Not only it is higher, it is increasing over the period. And if I take the monthly consumption expenditure across these sectors, the results are the same. The final conclusion, the final result or final implication of this kind of a service-led structural transformation is that it has got a social group dimension also. It has got a social group dimension means that in the service-led growth paradigm, the historically deprived communities, the SCs and the STs are also in the lower tail of the distribution. Thank you.
At the outset of the presentation, you said that your presentation is tended to it to be balanced. But you reached to the conclusion that the whole question of creamy is to be revisited. Yes. How you reach the conclusion?
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Vijayashree. My question is for Shyjan, sir. Actually, service sector has undergone several structural changes all through these years. And right now, in present scenario, what is being seen is entrepreneurship is seen as a emerging trend. So how do you see that? How do you feel how entrepreneurship is going to affect the whole service sector growth, the future of service sector of Kerala? That's my question. Thank you.
My name is Pooja. My question is for Prasad, sir. And we have been discussing about the tribals and the SCSTs and tribals issues, their problems and all that. And as we all know, there are a lot of policies and policy implications that are reservations for them. But still, there is something lacking. And according to you, what is this thing that is lacking? Is it just the thing there is no proper implementation, or is it just a requirement of more time?
Myself, Angel. I have a questions to Dr. Shyjan. So you have explained wage parity in service sector. So service sector, we all know it's such a heterogeneous sector, and again within the same service itself, productivity as well as efficiency of individuals are different. In this context, how you will explain a wage parity?
Kabir and Shyjan. You have given some data on Hindu OBCs and so on, but is there some data on the Christian OBCs, Latin Catholics and so on? And what about Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims? Is there any data available? I also one question to Dr. Prasad. It's a doubt actually. You have said that 51.56% of STs are in agriculture and allied sectors, and among the general population it is 17.81%. So general includes SCs and STs, or is it, is it excluding SCs and STs?
As income increases, the percentage that is spent on food comes down, and you said that this need not be applicable in a developing economy, and this has been proved empirically. This is applicable in developing economies, has been proved empirically, and how can you substantiate your argument that Angel's law is not applicable in the case of Kerala? And secondly, regarding the whole idea of service sector, don't you feel that the whole service sector needs reclassification? Because banking comes under service sector, health comes under service sector, education comes under service sector. But we see that in all these three major sectors, it's a private groups, or these are now aloof from the public sector, and these are all profit-making industries. So if you put these three categories under the industrial sector, you can see that there can be, your Gini coefficient may be changing. The whole NSSO and the looking into the definition of service sector itself, what I feel is that it needs correction.
My question is towards Dr. A.K. Prasad. So don't you feel that you have to consider about the performance of the ST students in the board examinations, of the data is available, and also what about the gender parity index of the ST students? Because if you just analyze the gender parity index in a very systematic manner, you could understand that for the ST category, the gender parity index seems to be below 1, which shows that there is a pro-male bias in the educational scenario for the ST students. So don't you think that that should be changed? And also regarding one of the concerns that repeatedly was put forward by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs was that there was lack of primers in the particular tribal languages, which restricted the development of, which restricted advances in education for the tribals, because their language is quite different from that of us. So the lack of availability of primers in their language seems to be a hurdle for the ST students to access education. So how you view this points?
Ms. Subair, my question to Prasad sir. You have explained the pathetic condition of tribes in Kerala, which is a paradox to Kerala model development. So how will you place Kerala model development in the context of these tribe issues? And another thing, I don't know, I think this development question should include women's issues also, because you excluded this unmarried mother issues we heard about, and infant mortality and invasion of the so-called civilized people to their habitat areas. So how will you, what is your opinion about these women issues especially?
You said there is no Vaishya community in Kerala. It is true, there is no Vaishya community. There is only Brahmin, Kshatriyas and Shudras. Then what about the Nair community? Where are they? And it is true, originally Nairs belong to the Shudra community. Then the government is not giving reservation for that Shudra community. Are you supporting?
Regarding your question, I told that the conclusion reached is absolutely negative on reworking sometimes. But basically, our data shows that if we take the case of inequality, the larger the case of inequality, then comes in the question of privilege. If inequality is lower, and if the intergroup inequality, if we take difference with other groups, okay, if a particular community performs very poor, and if within the community inequality is very low, then the question of privilege doesn't appear. That is the theoretical logical argument. Regarding the question that you raised, it's a very, very important thing. It is because actually of the data condition. We have two sets of data in the National Census Survey. One is the data relating to social groups, where it is the classification comes as SC, ST, others. Then we have a set of data based on religion, Hindu, Christian, Muslim. So once we make adjustments, it is by assessing the data that we make the whole data. And we are not able to have, if only we separate out the total Christian, would we be able to reach that? So we are not able to reach that, which is very important. In fact, if we, the Dalit Christians and also the Latin Catholic Christians, they're actually one of the worst. No doubt about that. And there's a very funny question. And I remember when I was doing my research in the Madras archives, when I used to, there are quite a lot of articles on Nayars. Quite a lot of articles. Nayars, Nerujin. Some people arguing that they are the people belong to Nagas. Nayars, derived from the word Nagas and so on. There are so many things. But in fact, when during the time of the social reform movement, one of the things which is opposed by Mandathavatanapan was that the Nayars should never be addressed as Sudras. Okay? He considered it as delegate. And even the Nayars do not say that you talk to Sudras. So the problem arises because when we try to bring in the Varna system into the Kerala system, there are a whole lot of problems. That is why E.M.S. Namboodiripad was very careful when he used the term Jati Janmi Vyavastha. That is how he captured it. Jati Janmi Vyavastha. It is a Jati system, not a Varna system. Therefore, don't try to bring in the question of Varna. And I have one small question to Dr. Prasad. That is, in our data, I have shown that the inequality is quite high. And when we speak of the schedule type, we should be more clear. There are certain groups like the Kanis, the Kuchas, who are in a far better condition. Okay, but there is a whole lot of other tribes who do not have land, or not properly employed. Recently, I had been to Hyderabad. The life is quite But on the other hand, if we take the other two, that's why if you take the employment statistics I have, all the statistics on education, etc., what we find is that if we take the total, it is sometimes mistakes. Thank you.
A number of questions were asked to answer. Most of them are very difficult. Okay, the first question was from Pooja. Pooja, we have a scheduled tribes development department. Around thousands employees are there. For their salary disbursement, the crores of rupees are spent by the government. In one of the earlier presentations, I made the same opinion that this department should be abolished. And the amount which earmarked for paying salary should be distributed equally to the tribals. Definitely we can take them to be part of that. You know that we have a special operation for the development. More than 40 programs are implemented by this corporation for the season. But those programs are implemented inefficiently. In 2001, our planning board conducted a study. According to study the study finds that almost all programs are implemented inefficiently. So they suggested that there should be a proper mechanism to monitor the implementation of the programs. Another question by this friend. So regarding this general population, including SCs and STs, how is clear. Then another question is about gender parity. In the aspect of education, parity is a big problem. Among women, education is very low compared to males. Anyway, according to the census report 2011, it is found that the number of graduates among tribal women is greater than the number of graduates among males. This is a new finding. Regarding the friend's question, that Kerala is fast, developing very fast, but it is proven that the tribal socio-economic conditions is not improving. Their special socio-economic situation where settlements are made present. So government should take immediate steps, not to do that. Land is a big problem. There are some communities and tribes, for example, Malaria, they are important. Socially and economically, they are much advanced. This is because of they have land in sufficient quantity, acres of land. See that 10 years back, when I visited America village, where I have a number of villages. So I visited a number of current families, inquired about their assets. See, in almost all families there, they are having average size of 5 acres. 5 acres. That's why they are far better than other tribes. In respect of many other tribes, they are having sufficient quantity land fast. Okay, so.
Thank you for the questions. I have 4 questions from 3 sides. I'm so happy that people are awake at the length. One from entrepreneurship. I can ask also Prasad was saying, we will be just trying to answer this. We need not be an answer, but we will be addressing the questions. Entrepreneurship versus the structure of the services sector. Even if I deviate, let me start like this. The self-employment part, especially when I discuss the wage inequality, the self-employment part is excluded because of the difficulty in gathering data on wage from the self-employed people. But self-employed constitute almost half of the total employment. And the self-employed is therefore conceived as the commonest employment in India by Barbara Harris White. Towards your question of entrepreneurship, let us think aloud where this entrepreneurship is coming in. Whether this entrepreneurship is coming in the manufacturing sector or any other goods producing sector. We all know that these new kinds of entrepreneurships are coming, except the kind of small entrepreneurial attempts at the industry kind of levels. The most of the entrepreneurship things are coming within the broad sector called the services sector. So if you ask me kind of this question with respect to my conclusion, I would rather say that this may be good in terms of the economic growth and services sector transformation, but my emphasis was on the limits of this kind of a growth. The limit in the sense it is in fact limiting the physical achievement or the goods producing, the total goods produced in the economy. By limits of the services sector, in fact, I try to turn back to the economic growth driven by the goods producing sectors. Regarding the service wage, this wage is the only information that is available to assess even the productivity. Yeah, we do not have any other ways of measuring the efficiency and productivity within each of the subsectors, and that is why the analysis became like this. So we thought that the wage becomes the only the indicator which indicates, in fact, wage indicates the efficiency or productivity within each of the subsectors. We do not have. Maybe if we can estimate the productivity and efficiency by way of a further study, further empirical study. This may be done in fact. Question on Engel's law, I did not say that it is not applicable to Kerala. I was mentioning that the available literature says that even the income elasticity argument of explaining the structural transformation is not applicable to the developing countries as a whole. Because of 2 things. Let us think in this way, cross-section. Cross-section analysis means that when you move from a low income country to a high income country, then the structural transformation should be more in favor of the services sector. Yeah, but this is not being verified internationally. This is verified internationally. It means that the higher income countries are having higher income and they are having higher share of services sector. Now come back to the developing countries. Within the developing countries, they are in fact at the lower side of income. They have only very low income. Even the studies say that $250 as income. Now, but the very low level of income, how can there be service sector be higher? If you have the income elasticity kind of an argument, it means that your income has to be increased so as to have a service sector. But even with low levels of income, even with $250 a dollar, you can have higher services sector. How can it happen? It can happen not because of the Engels law, not because of the income elasticity, but because of some other reasons. The reasons that I have listed earlier, 3 reasons. Again, about the classifications, as you mentioned is correct, but how do we classify it? We have to follow some kind of a classification. Especially, some people was asking me like, why don't you use construction? But there was a question that if we include the construction in the services sector, then whether there will be some change. I have done it. In fact, there is no change. The inequality is still higher in the services sector. In terms of the banking and all, I would rather be with you in arguing that many kind of services sector needs kind of a reclassification. Some of them, especially take the ICT kind of a thing, especially the BPO kind of a thing, or software developing kind of activity. It's very difficult to clearly define whether it belongs to manufacturing or it belongs to service sector. What I have followed is the standard national industrial classification. Thank you.
Friends, on behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank our panelists for keeping us all awake in the afternoon and for this very interesting set of presentations which they have made. I'm not going to hold you further. I just wanted to say that just common to each of them is that each of them began with very, very interesting questions and then very quickly moved on to data. So I was all the time looking for, sometimes it is assumed that data speaks for itself, but it does not. And I think what one requires also is, for example, a lot more culling out or, going back to the questions that are being raised and then seeing how much is the data actually, speaking to the kind of question that is raised. Just to give you an example of what I'm trying to say is that, for example, Kabir sir raised this issue about reservation and reduction in inequality. I mean, of course, one of the things he's saying is the work is in progress and they will look at it, go back to the issue of creamy layer. But one other interesting thing which I thought was, what is the relationship between reservation and reduction in inequality? And I'm not very sure from the data itself you can see some of these things. I think something more will have to be said about how one looks at this question. Similarly, I thought Dr. Prasad in the beginning raised the issue of the policy of isolation, policy of integration. And thereafter, the entire set of data that Dr. Prasad gave us a status report on the tribal and particularly in Kerala, going back to the question of how does this data actually speak to whether it is speaking to isolation, whether it is speaking to forces of integration. And the other thing is, from the data, the status itself, I'm not very sure whether it is implicit, but it needs to be made explicit, are also the problems so that you come to certain kinds of prospects. And once again, in Dr. Shyjan's presentation, I found that he also asked some very, very telling and interesting questions. One of them which I noted down is the service sector sustainable? Right? Have we bypassed the manufacturing? And then I was looking at, when he said we looked at the employment, look at the implications. I wanted the implications again to go back to the question on how does he look at this question of is the service sector sustainable, and what have we lost or what have we gained from having bypassed the manufacturing sector. I'll stop with that and thank once again the panelists very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon to one and all present here. I'm here to extend my sincere thanks for such a vibrant session. First of all, let me thank Dr. Padmini Swaminathan, the most dynamic person who shared the session. Then my beloved sir, Dr. M. Kabir, for such an informative talk, explaining all the intricate caste system prevalent in the society.
and its consequences, the intra group inequality, and my beloved sir, Dr. Prasad, for his very enlightening talk about the tribal groups and the various problems faced by them, the various development strategies for their upliftment, and Dr. Shyjan, I thank him for his very resourceful talk which is centered on the service sector. And finally, I thank the audience, very responsive and participating very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. The session comes to an end. I thank you all for your active participation. We have arranged for tea for all of you. I request all of you to join us for tea, and let us make it quick because we have one more session to go and there are lots of presentations in the next sessions.